With desertification in mind, here we can see the driveway to the property. On either side of the driveway, we can see turf, large sections of turf environment. I mean, an aerial shot of this property would show us very clearly where things are at, biologically speaking. And this is typical to many properties around Australia. I mean, I see some good things and I see some not so good things as far as sustainability goes, as far as supporting vegetation. And in front of us on this driveway, we can see an avenue of trees. I recently treated these trees, and that as a topic will come up in part 2 of this segment. A driveway by its nature is compacted, more so than a turf environment, but not by much. And we can see by looking at the turf itself, that we have an environment that is not far off dead. The above ground parts of the turf, have most certainly died. And probably the only plant which is actually living or was living in this environment are actually dandelions. Dandelions are a common weed in the turf environment and on the roadsides, on roads all around Australia. And here in this case, when we look closely, we can see that the dandelions are dead. These dandelions have been treated by herbicide. Herbicide is another major factor for causing desertification in the soil environment. There are many dandelions, native and exotic, introduced. And looking closely at this fellow, we can see this one's still alive. This one hasn't been treated. The interesting thing about weeds like this is that if you dig them up, as opposed to treat them by herbicide, if you actually dig them out of the ground, you'll find their long taproots, but you'll also find that the soil is actually quite moist beneath them. They do a very good job of holding soil moisture. Weeds such as this actually play a very important role as a means to help not only reduce desertification, but to set soils up to grow the kinds of perennial plants that lead to being in a forest. Now, these observations were very widely covered through the work of Peter Andrews, who wrote the books Back from the Brink and Beyond the Brink. He was awarded an OBE for his life's work. And he encourages, and I encourage, all people to reconsider the role of weeds in the natural environment. So the dandelion, like all weeds, are here to help to restore the soil environment. And when we treat them with herbicides, when we kill them, what do? We set the soil up to grow more weeds. It's a loop. Coming back to the driveway, we can see a very large surface area that is not hospitable for the growth of roots and trees. And considering the tree, no tree evolved to stand alone. There may be one or two desert species that in nature that have evolved to be on their own, but most trees that we experience in horticulture, in arboriculture, in most land-based environments, evolved to be a part of forest systems and evolved to have many associates below ground. We can look to an adjacent specimen. This tree most certainly is in slightly better condition, but still is very stunted for a tree of this age. The kinds of symptoms that we can expect to see as indicators of drought stress are sparsity, dieback at the tips, often a yellow colour to the foliage. These are all symptoms of drought stress, desertification, and a lack of needed association below ground. Plants gain their nutrients or elements from the atmosphere and from the soil. To gain elements from the soil, they need water. To gain the elements from the atmosphere, they need sunlight. Plants biologically act as pumps, harvesting elements from the soils and harvesting elements from the atmosphere. But much more than this, plants act as pumps for the nutrient cycles for all life. The examples of desertification abound, and the greatest indicators we can see in the soil itself. Even just visually, you know, we can see that this is like a desert. You know, when we take a sample, you know, and we move it around, it's just dust. And yet seeded in this soil is the microbiology to help turn it around, given the right kind of support. Here we have another example, you know, what has been a historical fire pit. You know, through bonfires actually radiate, you know, heat into the soil, killing off any microbiology below ground. You know, a good way to kill a tree is to put a fire pit over its base and just constantly burn. You know, you can see that there's very little weed growth even growing anywhere around here, and that can be the case for months even after a fire pit has been utilised.